There's moments when a group of people set out to change a society and they form an organization or they have an organization and they organize their butt off. Maybe 30 years. In 30 years later, they're bigger, maybe not, but they really haven't changed anything. They just don't worked hard. They really, really worked hard. Then then there's moments which just they seem to come out of nowhere where suddenly the nation really wants to change. There's something in the people that wants to happen. Now, when you look at it superficially, between this is an organizational time and this is a time for a movement, before the movement breaks out and it's just under the radar, honestly, it's very hard to tell. I mean, it really is. I mean, my example is January 1960. I mean, there was absolutely zero evidence that millions and millions of people in their 20s were about to emerge and change the whole world. I mean, there was no evidence for that at all. In a way, you could say the same thing here. I mean, we could just be laughed at, like, what are you talking about? A handful of people are going to gather here in Lyons, Colorado, and we're going to all shake hands and say, let's go change the whole world. Even though it sounds crazy, it actually is not out there at all. It just, all we got to do is just walk forward. It's really about it. So now the way it worked for us in the 60s was we had a spark. I like sparks, To me, our spark in this time, 2013 through 2014, it might be just some magical event that nobody anticipated, just comes out of left field and boom, we're sparked. It could be that way. That's actually how it did happen in the 60s. In February 1960, there were 4 black students. They went to school in Greensboro, North Carolina. They didn't call a press conference. They didn't write a position paper. They didn't do anything except just go down to an all-white Woolworth's lunch counter and take their seats, which was absolutely forbidden. Okay, and they, there was no fanfare. They just sat there and they ordered their lunch. As they were pushed and shoved and taunted, and actually some had cigarettes ground up in the back of their neck. The press, local press, noticed, and pretty soon I was in college in Ohio, and I was seeing their courage. I went to an all-white high school. I knew very well that there were black students on the other side of town. I knew very well that did not line up with the American principles or Constitution. And I used to stand up in social studies class, say, is this all men are created equal? I mean, what's this? And you could just hear a pin drop, and it was hush. It was a forbidden subject. You couldn't get any teacher on your side. So what was I going to write my senator, who owned the largest apple orchard in the world? Based completely on entrenched racist culture, send a letter to the White House. Wait for Godot. What you have to understand is what we did was we just moved out ourselves. Okay, we were 500,000 strong in 60 days. We were zero, like today. Okay, you can say there's lots going on, and there is, of course, but not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about coming together. Okay, we were like together, 500,000 in the first 2 months, and then we went on. By 1967, that can seem like a long time, but it really isn't that long. I had 150 national organizations in a coalition. We did our first demonstration against the war. 150,000 people were there. Okay, and then we decided then I became the coordinator of this coalition, and then I decided, well, let's go to Chicago. at the Democratic Convention, and I was certain that we would bring 500,000 people. The mayor of Chicago had a different idea, and so permits were granted. So we had to make the decision: what do we do now? So basically, I made the decision: let's go anyway. I mean, to give you an idea of this one event, I mean, Gallup poll, you've heard of them. You know, they did a survey of the country of what is the opinion of the American people about the war in Vietnam. A majority favored the war in Vietnam before Chicago. I mean, this was like 1 week before Chicago. 1 week after Chicago, same Gallup poll showed a majority of the American people supported our position to get out of Vietnam. One event. Everybody that's involved in this project is really understanding that the situation is not fine. What we do or don't do right now in this very time is going to determine whether the human race exists or doesn't exist on Earth. We're in a moment when it's no kidding. You know, we got to shake ourselves out of sleep and move. And by moving, I don't mean let's just all get pissed off at the Republicans. Let's go force Congress to reduce carbon footprint by 10%. I mean, reducing the carbon footprint by 10% will do nothing. It's still, we're at 400 parts per million right now, and we're going to 450, even if we were to reduce the carbon footprint, which we are not. You know, so things are not normal, things are not fine, and basically Boulder is in trouble, and so is the human race, and New York is going to be underwater, and so is Da Nang, and so is every coastal city, and this is our reality. And really, it isn't carbon. It's like, we're so beyond carbon. I mean, it's like how we build. It's how we grow food. It's how we think. We need a new human being. We have no idea that this whole place is simply a reflection of ourselves. So what you're going to see in the bee tribe over and over and over again is stop the finger pointing, drop the blame, okay? No one's doing anything to you. No one's ever done anything to you. You know, get over it. Let's realize that there isn't anybody to change out there. It's only ourselves to change. This wisdom has been around for a long time. This is the first time, though, in the last decade that the field of particle physics is now starting to move with experimental understandings that would support this idea. The world is a psychological construct whose origin is ourself. The whole place is a mirror reflecting back to you your own self-image. We have to have a complete rescripting of ourself, and out of ourself rescript the entire human future. The future is going to only remember this generation. You know, one of the things that I've come to realize is that in a future time, looking back on this time, quite honestly, nobody's going to remember the Renaissance or the American Revolution or the Civil War or World War II or the 1960s. But everybody is going to remember you. You know, everybody's going to remember you, and everyone's going to remember what you do or you don't do. You know, because you are the pivot point. In the spring of 1970, I called for a nationwide student strike, and 90% of American colleges and universities shut down. I mean, it was a big event. You know, how many people were on strike? I don't know, over 5 million though. And what was their age? Well, everybody was in their 20s. The last 50 years, more people were born than were born in the last 5,000 years combined. And half of the population is under 25. we had this saying, which was, you know, really arrogant and in many ways inappropriate. You know, you can't trust anybody over 30. You know, and that was in the 60s. You know, I'm kind of coming around to that again myself. You know, I have to say,
Hey.
you know, well, I know, but there are going to be exceptions, fortunately. But the thing is that, you know, people who are in their 20s, my belief is that they're going to get this. I mean, you don't have to be so careful. I mean, we're just going to call it. You know, we're just going to call it. And my bet is we're going to call it right. And everybody that hears it in their 20s is going to be pretty much like, sign me up. Let's do this. Let's get going.